The joint survival training exercise on Velix 9 was meant to be routine, a week-long endurance trial across semi-arid terrain with minimal resupply, conducted to foster cooperation between species. The planet wasn't hostile. It was hot. Always hot. Low humidity atmosphere, twin suns, ground that radiated like a stove, the kind of heat that made electronics wilt and cooled blood pump slower. Lieutenant Mason Rhodes led the human unit. He was 38, compact, sunburned even under UV shielding, and built like a man whose body had learned long ago that rest wasn't always an option. His uniform clung to his back, soaked. His sleeves were rolled up. His hydration pack was half empty, and his face looked like it had been washed with a bucket of salt water. And the Drelari contingent, led by Envoy Turek, observed from 30 meters behind. Drelari physiology was different. Scaled hide, internal temperature regulation, minimal external fluid loss. They watched Mason with a mix of confusion and concern. By day 3, the Drelari were still upright but visibly strained. Their reaction time dipped. Movement grew sluggish. Even their speech slowed. But Mason? Still moving, still muttering field status, still soaked to the bone. Turek finally approached him after the midday check-in. "You were leaking," Turek said, voice clipped. "Continuously." Mason paused, pulled his neck buff aside and wiped his face. Sweating. That much fluid loss indicates organ strain. Cooling system. Built. Turek blinked, all 4 eyelids cycling. "You are not concerned?" Mason shrugged. "Not unless I stop sweating." Turek stared. "Explain." Mason crouched beside a low rock, scanning the horizon through heat shimmer. "We burn hotter than most species. Small surface area compared to body mass, vertical stance, high metabolic baseline, but we can dump heat like nothing else. Sweat pulls heat off the skin as it evaporates, lowers core temp, means I can keep moving." Turek hesitated. "It appears inefficient." "You know who else thought that? Every predator that tried to chase us for more than 10 minutes. Later that evening, in the mission log, Turek wrote, "Humans display fluid loss rates alarming by Drelari standards. Observation suggests this is not pathological. Their bodies appear to convert internal temperature regulation into an active cooling response through evaporation. Further study required." The following day brought a real test. The group reached the Ravari Plateau, an exposed stretch with no natural shade, high reflectivity, and radiant heat that surged 10 degrees above atmospheric baseline. Per training protocol, they proceeded across it in full gear, moving from one nav beacon to the next. Turek's second, Velix, began to stumble halfway through the second sector. Or temperature climbing, peripheral shaking. Turek flagged the medic. Velix was pulled from the line. Hydration and rest, no permanent damage. Mason didn't break stride. By Sector 4, his uniform was completely saturated. Sweat streamed down his arms, dripping from his fingertips. His face was red, veins at his temples bulging, but his vitals, as confirmed by the biometric link, remained within tolerance. High, but stable. Turek approached him again at the checkpoint. "You are shedding fluid at a dangerous rate." "I'm drinking enough to compensate," Mason replied, pulling a ration bar from his pack. "Keep the electrolytes balanced, keep the fluids moving. Your body is in thermal overdrive." "Is working." Turek watched the humans around them. Same pattern, all soaked, all red-faced, none collapsing. "You were built for this," Turek said slowly. "We evolved for it," Mason corrected, running down game animals in open sun, outlasting things that were faster. "We don't win on strength. We win on not stopping." That night, back at the temporary bivouac, Turek ran a heat profile comparison. Drelari. Baseline increase under stress by 4%. Peak performance loss at 8%. Beyond that, cognitive function dropped. Human. Baseline increase up to 9% during peak exertion. Performance drop negligible as long as hydration was maintained. skin temperature regulated by external liquid excretion, cognitive function stable. Turek entered a new observation. The human thermoregulatory system appears designed for prolonged heat endurance. Sweat, a system we previously dismissed as wasteful, functions as a critical cooling mechanism that maintains function beyond the limits of comparable species. What looks like system failure is instead strategic equilibrium. On the 6th day, the storm hit. Velix 9 storms weren't electrical or wet. They were thermal vortices, bursts of superheated wind and static pressure that whipped surface particles into choking waves of friction. Visibility dropped. Navigation failed. The team took shelter under a natural rock shelf. Half collapsed and angled against the wind. Velix was down again. Turek held one stabilizer pole in place while shouting over the comms. "We cannot remain here long. We're not moving until this passes," Mason said, crouched beside his bag, sweating as usual. "You are pushing too far," Turek snapped. Mason didn't even look up. "This isn't too far. Too far is when my hands stop shaking." Turek checked his readings. Mason's heart rate was elevated but steady. Sodium levels slightly low, corrected by supplements. Body temp just under critical. His skin was slick, still sweating. "You are compensating," Turek said. Mason nodded. "It's not pleasant, but it works." Hours passed. When the storm subsided, the team moved again. The Drillari stumbled forward, even those who had seemed untouched days earlier. Mason jogged to the final checkpoint with 2 full packs, his and Velix's. He reached the evac point just ahead of the med drone. Turek watched him pour water over his head before drinking. "You were not built for peace," Turek said quietly. "No," Mason replied. "We were built to endure." Turek entered his final field note that evening. Humans do not overheat as others do. Their bodies look like they are failing, drenched in sweat, faces flushed, clothes soaked. But that is not breakdown. It is function. Their bodies are engines designed to run hot and keep going. After the Velix 9 exercise, the debriefing occurred aboard the orbital station Tarsus Relay, a high-altitude refueling platform and data transfer hub. The Drillari contingent required 2 days in thermal recovery pods. Their blood chemistry had shifted dangerously toward protein denaturation thresholds, and 2 of them required skin regeneration treatment from microburn exposure caused by radiative heat. The humans? They filed incident reports, cleaned their gear, and went for a run on the upper deck. Turek watched them from a seated position in the observation dome, chest wrapped in a medical compression shell. His internal organs were still readjusting to equilibrium. He sipped nutrient fluid through a mouth tube while watching Mason jog by at a relaxed pace, still sweating in the station's mild climate. "Where are you running now?" Turek asked through the comms. Mason slowed, resting his hands on the rail. "Gotta flush the lactic acid. If I sit still too long, my legs tighten." "You suffered more exposure than anyone. You are still dripping." "That's the point." Turek's head tilted. "Explain again." "Body heat ramps up during exertion. If we stop suddenly, it can linger, pool in the wrong places, joints, muscles, organs. We cool by moving slower, not by going still. Sweat stays on the skin, evaporates in waves. That keeps the heat moving outward." Turek watched a droplet roll from Mason's jaw, drop to the deck, and vanish. "You appear as though in distress," Turek said. Mason wiped his face with a towel. "That's just how we look when we're working." That evening, Turek reviewed human thermal imaging footage from the Rivari Plateau. The software's alerts had gone wild, flagged bright red skin temperature spikes, detected extreme fluid loss, predicted imminent collapse. Yet none had occurred. Turek pulled up comparison scans from 2 other species who'd completed similar exercises over the past cycles. Both had ceased motion far earlier under similar conditions. Their internal temps rose with no visible warning until system failure was close. The humans, by contrast, were lit up like warning signs, but continued forward. They shine because they are cooling, Turek wrote. That phrase caught traction. Back in the joint medical lab, he initiated a cross-species comparative panel. 2 humans volunteered, Mason and a specialist named Nolan, a larger man with a slower gait but more muscle mass. They were placed in a sealed thermal chamber set to simulate mild desert conditions. Drillari, Mixith, and Torelli observers stood by. The objective was simple: walk a treadmill for 90 minutes at light gear weight and observe core responses. The Mixith lasted 32 minutes. Their gill vents dried despite humidifiers, and neurological signals began to desync. They tapped out, unsteady. The Torelli, cold-blooded and designed for polar terrain, lasted 24 minutes before vertigo kicked in. The Drillari made it to 61, aided by supplemental hydration and focused breathing techniques. By then, their visual acuity was impaired and cognitive reaction time had dropped by nearly 40%. Mason made it the full 90. By the end, he was soaked again, his shirt stuck to his chest. Salt lines marked his temples. His hydration bag was empty. His speech was measured but clear. He makes 124, he said, breathing steady, core temp holding at 100.2. Turek asked, "Do you feel impaired?" Mason shook his head. "That's a warm-up." Nolan lasted another 15 minutes past that. He was drenched, breathing harder, but still upright. He laughed during the final 5 minutes of the session. "You're red," a Torelli officer noted. "I'm hot," Nolan replied, "but that's the design." The session data was conclusive. Turek entered the formal report. Human thermoregulation does not rely on behavioral control or external mechanisms. It is automatic. Their sweat response begins rapidly, functions continuously, and, with proper hydration, allows extended performance beyond the thermal limit of most oxygen-breathing sapients. He paused, then added, "Our sensors read them as unstable. The truth is the opposite. What looks like failure is efficiency in motion." Later that cycle, during a medical seminar, Turek presented his findings. A Centauri scholar challenged the data. "You describe fluid loss as an advantage. It is waste." Mason, seated near the back, answered instead. "Waste is what you can't use. This is how we stay cool. Heat kills performance, fast. It dulls thinking, shuts down organs. If we didn't sweat, we'd burn out fast." The Centauri was not convinced. "But you reek." Mason smirked. "Survival's rarely glamorous." Outside, back in the hall, Turek asked him, "Do you take pride in this function?" Mason shrugged. "It keeps me in the fight, that's enough." Later, the humans ran a voluntary demonstration, a 60-minute drill in full gear under simulated desert sun. No cooling suits, just hydration, body mass, and their own sweat. Drenari officers watched in disbelief as Mason and his team moved like machines, wet, flushed, but never stumbling. When it was over, they smiled through the salt. That night, Turek stood by the observation dome, watching station mist swirl in filtered moonlight. Mason joined him, toweling off, sipping rehydration fluid. Turek asked quietly, "What happens if the cooling fails?" Mason's expression didn't change. "Then we slow down, or we die." Turek stared at the fluid pooling around Mason's boots. "And yet you push forward." "Yeah," Mason said, "because we know the body gives out long after the mind says it will." By the start of the next cycle, Mason's team was assigned to Operation Crossplane, a cooperative maneuver through the Tarkan Dune stretch, a mineral-heavy region with active geothermal faults. The terrain pulsed with trapped heat. Subsurface steam vents could spike surface temperatures by 20 degrees in minutes. Even stationary gear required thermal shielding. The mission was to escort a planetary scientist crew from a central extraction zone to the outer edge, mapping safe passage for future drills. The path was unstable, the route untested. Turek joined the operation as medical oversight. His decision surprised even his own unit. "I need to see it," he said, "in real conditions." The Drillari contingent wore full subdermal cooling systems, body shields, hydration suits. The humans wore tan exo-weave fatigues, sweat-wicking shirts, and fabric wraps. Mason taped his wrists, layered a mesh over his cap, and checked his water filter unit with a casual click. 3 hours in, the Drillari began slowing. The humidity was low, but the ground bled heat upward through their boots. Their internal systems reported rising temperatures, and by hour 4, one of Turek's own lieutenants began showing signs of thermal disorientation. Numb digits, slurred response, decreased sweat gland stimulation, which was more alarming given the absence of any external fluid at all. Mason kept moving. His neck was soaked. Sweat ran visibly down his temples. He looked like someone who'd been caught in a warm rainstorm. But his movement stayed smooth. His command stayed sharp. They reached a wind-cut ravine mid-march, a natural bottleneck. The Drillari paused under an overhang, panting. The humans moved past them with ease. Turek sat beside Mason, who was squeezing a hydration pouch into his mouth while dripping sweat onto the cracked ground. "You have lost over a liter of fluid," Turek said. "That is enough to destabilize most beings." "I've replaced it," Mason said. 3 times over. Your flesh, overexerted." Still thinking clearly, Turek checked his vitals. Core temp, 121.2, elevated but not dangerous. Heart rate, 126. Breathing steady, reflexes unchanged. Skin saturated, evaporative loss continuous. "This is a balancing act," Turek said. Mason nodded. "It always is." At checkpoint 6, one of the planetary surveyors, a Cyrex with photosensitive skin and limited hydration tolerance, collapsed. Mason reached her first, down on one knee, checking her pulse, shielding her face with his own arm. He was dripping onto her chest, his clothes dark with sweat. "She needs shade and fluids now," he said. Turek and the others got to work. Temporary cover was deployed, IVs hung, pulse stabilized. Afterward, Turek looked down at the spot Mason had knelt. There was a full outline of sweat in the dust, steaming faintly. "You're evaporating into the sand," he said. "Good," Mason said. "Means it's leaving me." The final leg of the march involved a steep ridge. Heat pooled along the incline. The air shimmered like liquid glass. Turek recorded thermal readings every 50 meters. Human sweat output increased linearly with climb intensity. Drillari cooling efficiency dropped off steeply. Internal temps began to rise out of sync with body surface temp, a bad sign. 2 Drillari had to stop and rest. Mason carried one of their packs to the top. Turek joined him at the ridge crest, bent with exhaustion. Mason's shirt was plastered to him. His lips were chapped. He sucked water through a straw tube without looking up. "You are almost out of water," Turek said. "I've got 1 pouch left, for emergencies. Not this. You should stop. If I stop now, I'll cramp. Momentum matters. You are running a combustion engine." "Exactly," Mason said, wiping salt from his brow. "You let it idle too long, and it seizes." At the evac site, med teams awaited with shade tents and cooling stations. The Drillari collapsed into cooling pods. The Cyrex was placed on oxygen. The human squad walked in calmly, stripping off gear piece by piece, pouring water over their heads, laughing like they'd just jogged a park trail. Mason sat on the edge of a crate, body wet, eyes half closed. Turek handed him a rehydration blend. "You've reached the theoretical edge of safe exertion." Mason took a long drink. "You should see the edge we trained at." "You flirt with failure." "Maybe, but we know how to recover. You sweat this much, you learn to watch your salts, keep moving, never skip fluids. It's not just heat tolerance, it's maintenance." Turek entered a fresh note in the Coalition's biological response archive. Human thermoregulation allows them to stabilize where others fail, but their performance is not magic. It is practiced. They manage their own limits constantly, balancing output with recovery. The sweat is not weakness, it is maintenance in real time. Where other species endure by conserving, humans endure by expending and replacing. They are never static. Their system does not cool by resistance, it cools by adaptation. That night, at the debriefing, a Mixith technician asked the human team, "Is this always how you operate?" Cho smiled. "Pretty much. Hot weather, cold weather, mountains, swamps." "Do you ever stop?" Mason answered, "If we stop too soon, someone else doesn't make it." The room went quiet. Back in the barracks, Turek reviewed Mason's data one last time. He watched a time-lapse of the man's vitals across 10 hours. Heat spikes, fluid loss, core stabilization, steady recovery, and above all, constant sweat output. He realized then, it was never a sign of failing. It was a sign of pushing forward. 2 weeks after Operation Crossplane, Lieutenant Mason Rhodes and his team were transferred to the Caldari Basin mission, an extended deployment in one of the hottest recorded environments within the Coalition's exploratory reach. The basin sat on a tectonic fault ring, surrounded by volcanic vents, and its atmosphere retained heat in slow-cycling thermal waves. Temperatures at ground level regularly exceeded 130 degrees Fahrenheit. It was, by every measure, a stress test. This mission wasn't a march, it was a station deployment. Establish thermal monitoring posts, conduct mineral surveys, and maintain the habitat module for an 18-day period. The Drillari team arrived in cooling suits, upgraded with dual-loop thermoregulators and passive cryo-buffered boots. The humans arrived with reinforced water packs and lighter uniforms than before. Turek, now officially attached as Xenomedical Liaison, pulled Mason aside before the first sortie. "You understand," he said, "that this environment has killed lesser-trained units." "I read the reports," Mason replied, checking the seals on his hydration gear. "You are sweating already?" It's 80 inside the airlock. That's warm for us, not deadly." Turek checked his medical tablet. "Your body hasn't even begun exertion." Mason finished adjusting the strap across his chest. "We don't wait for heat to hit us. We start cooling before it matters." The first 3 days proved revealing. The Drillari team required mandatory cool-down intervals every 2 hours. They rotated in and out of the shelter like heat-drenched pendulums, their metabolism unable to hold a stable operating threshold under continuous exposure. Despite the cooling suits, their internal readings climbed slowly each hour. The humans worked through it. Bason's team established 3 sensor towers across a 5-mile stretch of rocky flatlands. Their clothes were visibly soaked, salt stains forming at seams. Their skin glistened constantly, sunburn creeping where fabric didn't reach. They drank in strict intervals, adjusted for body mass, and supplemented electrolytes twice daily. When Turek reviewed their vitals, he expected trouble. Instead, he found consistency. Mason's core temp peaked at 101.5 during the longest field session, but stabilized within 20 minutes of returning to the shelter. Nolan peaked higher, 102.2, and showed signs of mild dehydration, which were reversed with IV support overnight. But the most remarkable data came from day 6. That morning, a fault tremor ruptured one of the coolant lines to the Drillari sleeping chamber. The temperature spiked above 110 inside their module before they could evacuate. 3 were pulled out in early-stage heat shock, disoriented, nauseous, borderline unresponsive. Mason responded without hesitation. He ran into the heat-wrapped compartment with minimal protective gear, sweat pouring off him in sheets. He lifted one Drillari onto a carry stretcher himself and directed Cho and Grant to retrieve the others. Inside that oven-like room, their sweat turned to vapor the moment it hit the walls. Mason's hands trembled only once during the lift. Afterward, Turek scanned him personally. Blood pressure stable. Sodium marginally low. Skin temperature high but not critical. The sweat, again, had kept his core regulated. "You entered a collapsing heat pocket," Turek said. "Why didn't you shut down?" "Because they couldn't afford for me to," Mason answered. "You should have collapsed from thermal burden." "If I had, who would have pulled the rest out?" Turek looked at the water still streaming off Mason's back. "It seems unnatural," he whispered. Mason let out a breath. "That's because you're seeing it wrong. You see us losing fluid and think something's breaking, but for us, that's the engine staying cool. You shut down, we pour it out. That's the difference." Turek updated his medical entry. Human thermoregulatory function does not fail under heat. It activates. Their evaporative cooling acts preemptively, not reactively. It allows them to persist in heat zones far beyond other species' tolerance. They do not fear the heat, they manage it, through process, preparation, and an instinctual understanding of their own limits. Later, Turek asked Mason what the training was like. "Start simple," Mason said. "You run until you can't. Then you keep running. You drink on time. You don't wait to feel thirsty. You learn what your body feels like just before it goes wrong. We teach that early. If you stop sweating, that's red alert. Otherwise, wet means working." "Wet means working," Turek repeated softly. On day 13, another incident solidified the lesson. An unexpected heat flare ignited near Tower 2. The Drillari stationed there triggered an emergency retreat beacon, but passed out before extraction arrived. Mason, again closest, sprinted a full kilometer across scorched earth to reach him. His boots left steaming prints. His arms gleamed with sweat. His body shed water like a faucet. He didn't stop moving. He didn't collapse. He didn't overheat. He reached the Drillari, pulled him out, and remained alert the entire evac. In post-analysis, his body had dropped nearly 2 liters of fluid in less than 30 minutes. He replaced it in 90. No kidney strain, no heat stroke, no loss of cognitive function. That night, Turek stood beside him during sunset on the observation deck. The sky burned violet, the air thick with distant geothermal haze. "You should not have made it through that," Turek said. Mason drank from his flask. "Sweated it out. Your body burned hot for 2 straight weeks." "Still running?" Turek nodded slowly. "And if it happens again?" "I'll sweat again," Mason said. "That's the design." Turek looked at him. "What happens if the water runs out?" Mason's gaze didn't waver. "Then we find more, or we slow down. But even then, we go further than most." Back in his medical suite, Turek completed the final summary for Coalition Medical Archives. Sweat is not a failure in humans. It is an elite thermal strategy embedded in their evolution. It requires constant vigilance, fluid intake, mineral balance, endurance conditioning, but the payoff is extreme resilience under heat stress. Where most bodies hide from heat, the human body meets it head-on. It responds not with shutdown, but with adaptation. It leaks to live, it shines to survive. The final entry read, "Their sweat is not a sign of weakness. It is proof they are still fighting." That night, the shelter cooled as planned. The Drillari slept in cryopods. Mason lay back on his cot, shirt off, arms behind his head, a water bottle resting near his chest. He was dry now. Still. But the moment the air system clicked into low-power mode, his skin glistened again. Just slightly. Cooling. Staying ready. The others didn't notice. But Turek, passing by, did. And he smiled.